Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude at BeyondMystic, and welcome to this deep woo-woo show entitled The Quantum Woo with MARYAM HENEIN and Bernhard Gunther. You can find his work at Veil of Reality here on YouTube and also on his website at veilofreality.com. Let's give him a big warm welcome to the show. Bernhard, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excellent.
Good to have you, Bernhard.
Excited to have you. And let me introduce, of course, our co-host for this series show here on YouTube. You can find MARYAM HENEIN on YouTube and also on honeycolony.com. MARYAM, welcome back et bienvenue.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited for this show, and I have to thank MARYAM for making this possible. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here on this live interactive show this evening. We will be taking your comments as we go throughout the show, and if we have time, maybe at the later half of the show, we will also be taking your questions for the fabulous individual here before you. Quite a bit of a topic list for this evening, but I want to start, as we always start, with our new guests to the show, and the question goes as follows, Bernhard. How did universe conspire to bring you to the work you're doing today?
Yeah. So, well, I can sum it up in a nutshell. You know, a lot of people asking the question, how did I start the work, started my work and everything I've been doing so far? And usually I can answer it in one sentence: because of suffering, right? Because of not being able to fit in early on, being bullied, being an outsider, you know, even early on, not having the goals like other people have, like couldn't relate to have just making money, family, and all of this. You know, I just always questions there must be more to life, right? Of being emotionally sensitive. And then, you know, just going along with the program, I grew up in Germany, Munich, and, you know, went to high school and even started university studying business because I thought, oh, like everybody else, just going along, you know, whatever everybody else is doing. But I never could fit in. I was always just, you know, silently suffering, so to speak. And then one day, a friend of mine introduced me to drums, to playing the drums at the age of 19. Quite late, I guess, to start an instrument back then. But I remember the first time I sat playing drums, and it really connected me to something higher. I feel like for this first time, I had a transcendental experience, like experiencing God, like, wow, there's something else. You know, there must be something more to life, so to speak, right? And then I just took that impulse. I quit University of Munich after 1 year, worked a day job, and moved to LA to go to drum school and pursue just drums. I thought that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. And back then I had my adolescent, I'm going to be a rock star in LA thing, you know? So I went through the whole disillusionment in LA and, you know, because things are not as you think they are in LA. So a lot of pretense, obviously, right?
Right.
But this drumming and exploring myself, I was able to express myself emotionally, artistically, creatively through music and drums, right? So that was beautiful. But then something deeper opened up, right? So more and more stuff came up, and then I was dealing with a lot of depression and despair and suicidal tendencies and thoughts, right? I got into almost classic rock archetype, into drugs,
right,
you know, and all of that, not the good kind. And then I remember one day I was waking up like in tears and just not knowing what to do with my life. And I knew this voice appeared, or something in my head tells me, if you don't, you know, you will die if you don't figure yourself out, basically. You know, you will have, you know, end this life. And that was the impulse to ask the questions, who am I? The ultimate question, that the path, you know, my early 20s. And, you know, synchronicities opened up, right? Like the saying is, ask and ask, you shall receive. And then books came out, got me deep into spirituality, psychological work, shadow work, Jungian psychology. I started studying already in the 90s. And at the same time, parallel, I started questioning the world, right? You know, back then in the 90s, I even remember back then was still VHS tapes. I watched a 8-hour presentation of this guy, David Icke.
Right.
In the 90s, like 8 hour, you know what I mean? His long presentations. Like,
oh, yeah, they were long.
I mean, it was just intense, like, holy fuck, what is that? So he kind of like opened up a world for me, you know. I mean, people have various ideas about David Icke, but he played a part in my life. And, you know, so, and then I started questioning and started to read. And back then I started researching was different than nowadays because there was no YouTube, right? No social media. So I had to actually look for information, actually read books and do more proper research rather than getting around sound bites and, you know, dealing with short attention span like nowadays. So, you know, that opened the door, you know, and that first came across, even like I already heard like what's happening right now. I heard about in the 90s, like that the plan is to render down the US into a third world communist socialist country to open up the floodgates for the socialist, communist, globalist, new world, technocratic new world order. And that's kind of what we see happening now. Back then, nobody would believe me and whatnot. So I already was called crazy. And then I got deep into the fringe, obviously the UFO phenomena, and then more into the esoteric, the occult, the hyperdimensional matrix, right? The non-physical entities that interfere with us. That's a bulk of my work on my website as well.
Right.
At some point, I took a detour. I took the New Age pill, right? At some point. So I got caught up in that as well. Obviously, at some, with all kinds of channel material and wishful thinking, but life taught me the harder lesson. But in a nutshell, for me, it was clear early on that this whole process of quote awakening needs to happen parallel. Like there needs to be the inner work, right, on all levels to come in alignment, to work through your stuff on a basic psychological level, and then also spiritual aspiration, and also outer work, meaning researching. Critical thinking, understanding neological fallacies and whatnot, and kind of like navigating and always having. I had to eat humble cake many times, because ultimately there's the mystery, and your mind will never completely figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. So ultimately, where I'm at right now, where I'm strong about, is also in alignment with my relationship to God, to the divine, whatever you may want to call it. It's nothing external. But seeing it in a higher context of the evolution of consciousness. And I think the times we're in right now, you can easily get into doom and gloom. Obviously, we see what's happening in the world. Mm. But I see there's an opportunity, right? Over the past 2 years, I'm sure you guys have experienced, there's a lot of people have gotten, quote, red pilled, because what happens to them is similar happened to me. You start to suffer, things are going down, and then you finally start to question, hold on, what's going on? Right. And I feel where we're in right now, that's the opportunity.
Right. Well, very good. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question here too. You mentioned suffering somewhere in there, and as a child not fitting in. And I have to say, you're going to fit in very well here with the audience, because a lot of them will relate to exactly what you're saying. And also, of course, the topic list you just mentioned there. But I remember watching one of your videos where you talked about suffering being a catalyst for change, or a catalyst for spiritual awakening, or words to that effect. Describe maybe a little bit for the audience here before I get MARYAM to chime in. How was that childhood for you? Did you have that longing, like a lot of the people here, about maybe not being at the right place, or not being on the right planet, even maybe out of sorts and out of connection with source, and maybe with your star family? Did you look up at the sky? What was the triggers to make you feel that you were so different and disconnected for everyone as a child?
Yeah, all of the above. Literally, I was out in the German fields, out in the sky looking. Right. There must be more. I remember like in the 80s when I was super, like early teens, when the film E.T. came out, you know what I mean? I was like, take me home, praying up to the sky and all these kind of things. Yeah. Which got me actually into traps of agreement, because it's from an occult perspective. It's not a smart thing to call in entities. So yes. I found it out later on. That's a whole other story, right? The New Age and calling in entities. You can make traps of agreement with negative entities posing as positive ones, and ties in the law of agreement and all these kind of things. But, it's twofold. I definitely felt like I'm not from this planet, definitely not. And got also more into one of my catalysts books was also when I first read, maybe some of your audience know this, Bringers of the Dawn by Barbara Messiniak. Right, she wrote this in the early 90s, and that really opened up, triggered something within me. So I definitely identified more with the Wanderer, the Starlight family, or star seeds and whatnot. But having said that, also my ego kind of hijacked this concept as well, to try to make yourself feel special. So I had to come to terms also with some basic childhood trauma, right? A lot of stuff because we feel alienated and not don't fit in. It's not necessarily related because we are special from another dimension, but also basic childhood trauma. We are wounded. So I had to confront that as well, right? On the basic psychological level, doing that kind of work, and not, taking on another identity to spiritual bypass my own process.
Exactly. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, absolutely. And these are the traps that we are all facing now as we're looking for these answers, and we're diving into new information, new material that is foreign to us in some ways. So there are still traps there. And I love what you're saying, because keeping that in mind as we are kind of dealing with the cognitive dissonance of what's happening on our planet right now, it's very easy to fall into another narrative or to fall into another limited hangout, and that's not what we want. We want to grow, we want to go through the awakening process, but that does involve doing, as you said earlier, a lot of that shadow work, a lot of that internal work. And in terms of healing, we are in a point in time now where universe and the energies that are hitting us are helping us, if we so choose, to break a lot of those cosmic karmic loops of this suffering that we just talked about. But again, you have to be conscious of that and be on the right path. So let me ask Maryam. So thank you, Bernhard. I really appreciate the introduction. And I'm sure, again, the audience here, just reading from the chat, they're jiving with you and they're resonating with you quite well. Maryam, tell the audience here how this all came about to be. How did you meet Bernhard and how did you make that connection?
I want to say also just what you've shared, Bernhard, of your journey just resonates. I don't know, I think we're similar in age, so that also, you know, that also resonates as well, I think, because we're the same age, and you're prophetic, and maybe all along it was to help people under the Rona regime. So I came across Bernhard, I guess it must be now 7 years ago, and I was getting out of a serious relationship, which between was 7 years before I got into another relationship, and lived with the person and witnessed them going to Haiti and literally picking up parasites. But then I felt that there was something energetic, some type of hijack, and my ex was named the entity or the parasite, so he was cognizant. And my girlfriend told me to reach out to Bernhard to do some body work in Topanga. And then when I looked at Bernhard, I was like, oh, he looks like my ex. And oh, he has the same birthday as my ex. So I felt, you know, just to be with someone who's embodying the sacred masculine and feminine, it would be a healing experience. And we connected. And to me, it's just so important, as my philosophy is know thyself, to meet someone like Bernhard and then be able to jive on all these levels. And then he introduced me to hyperdimensional entities. And then I shortly after saw one of his documentaries, which is about UFOs, but also the notion of, like, when I was young, I would think of like the ants, and I'm like, are we ants to someone else? And Bernhard in his film shows, like, how arrogant is it of us to think, like, as we have these cattle and dominate other beings, the notion of there can't be other beings that don't necessarily even have to come from another planet, but can be with it here, but we don't see them because they're operating on another dimension. So that really resonated. And with that, I had studied narcissism. I spent the whole summer. Well, I remember the first time I read a book on narcissism, I viscerally felt like nauseous, because I couldn't believe how cliche I had been caught in, a cliche, and how textbook a lot of these malignant narcissists are. And then the same as an empath, this dynamic of I would go away, we would break up, and I'd get my light again, and then I felt like he'd just come and like suck all the light. And as an empath, I would not even know where I start or he begins. So anyways, meeting Bernhard just introduced me to that, and then introduced me to love bites. And then he helped me not only with body work, but also embodiment is a big thing. Luckily, as a Capricorn, I'm not in the clouds. I'm very like rooted, and it's very important, I think, in everyone's spiritual practice to be grounded. So we did exercises, and I worked with someone else that he had suggested to kind of cut ties and cut cords. And it's amazing, this empath narc dynamic. In any case, then kind of lost touch under the Rona regime, and would read his work, and I felt that the audience would appreciate Bernhard. So yeah, that's how we met.
Very good. Thank you, Maryam. And Bernhard, how was it for you connecting with Maryam and working with the beautiful soul that is before us?
Yeah, I just remember, like, it's been a while back. I just remember, like, exactly when you shared me about your ex, and he literally, I remember what you talked about being that entity and all of that. And time flies by fast. So I remember all of that. I can also relate to that story, the shadow dance of the empath and the narcissist, because I had similar experiences, just different genders, obviously, introverted, and also the shadow dance of the codependent narc, and like also how this relates from the hyperdimensional perspective. The love bite Maryam was hinting at is also based on Eve Lorgan's work, which helped me a lot to work through my stuff. So there's whole other level where relationships can be hijacked by these hyperdimensional beings, entities, or one person is being hijacked by that and all that. So there are multidimensional levels to look at it from. And yeah, I mean, that's been also part of my life. I just moved. I escaped LA for obvious reasons, I hope, to Arizona. And but when I was living in LA, Topanga, I was a body worker, energy worker, healer, or whatever you may want to call it, for almost 20 years. Had my own practice, so worked that as well. And what Maryam said is very important in this day and age is embodiment, or the process of embodiment, especially nowadays, since we have this information overload. We are such mental beings, all over the place. We perceive reality through the internet, basically, which can be very deceptive, right? It's important to get informed, to stay informed, but there can be easily fall. I see this especially in the quote unquote truth community, like I mentioned before, get into this doom and gloom, because we, especially big tech, and we know it's kind of, it's highly censored, highly, the algorithms and the distorted and all of that. So it's important to, disconnect from all of that and get more in touch with our bodies, right? Our internal wisdom, because ultimately we need to, especially in this day and age, we need to tune into our internal guidance system to know where we need to be, to know what to do and all of that. And as long as we're stuck in the mind, we just get very much confused, right? Or act out of fear or desperation and all of that. So being grounded in the body, that's why I'm big on body-mind practices as well, to go or spending time in nature and all of that, do sometimes internet detox and all of that, because we all have our little addictions to those devices, right? And just taking care of ourselves on that level, right? Because as I said, especially with the whole rona and the jab and all of that, which has really all kinds of, I don't know how far I want to go into here, not to put your channel into danger. But
I'm already at channel number 3.
So
what are you going to do? It's very liberating to have to start over.
The point is really like soul integration, because there are consequences on a metaphysical and spiritual level. That's what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate that. Let me segue that into the first topic for the conversation tonight, and it was suffering, a catalyst for spiritual awakening. Now, for a lot of people, the topic you just mentioned now was exactly that, a catalyst for change. Whereas some people are still looking at it as a terrible, horrible thing going around the planet, and it's attached to all of this negativity. For a lot of us, it was a catalyst for change and for positive change, not only from the awakening process, but also diving into that internal work, that connection with self, connection with higher self, and all of that. So let me start by asking you this question. You mentioned earlier on suffering as a child. When did you transform for yourself that suffering into that catalyst of change and empowerment?
Well, it's kind of ongoing, I feel, right? The work never stops, even I don't like, people say the Great Awakening, I'm awake in this, and that's the word awake is throwing around very loosely. Right. And for me, I'm not awake in the true meaning of the word, which I would say is enlightenment, right? Complete embodiment, soul into individualization and all of that. I think at different levels of awakening, different stages. And for me, it's like a spiral out, like you become more aware, more conscious. I mean, the word consciousness or conscience is rooted in the word conspire, means to become more aware, to know more together, right? To become more, moving towards more objectivity, right? We're not fully objective. We have our subjective blind spots. But in the awakening process, as we raise consciousness, we become more objective. We see more things as they are, right? The ultimate state of awakening is to see the universe as the universe sees itself, with God's eyes. But we don't see through divine eyes. There's so much going on we have no idea of. And like, also what I want to point out on that note is whatever happens needs to happen and couldn't be any other way. There's no mistake in reality. And that's, you know, when we start to complain and it sucks, I don't want this, you know, then we're already resisting the moment. And when I talk about non-resistance of the moment, doesn't mean that we need to put up with what's going on, but it doesn't help to complain, right, at all, because we are where we are for various reasons. And a lot of this stuff didn't just start 2 years ago, by the way. It started decades, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, past lives ago, like based on the law, the samsara, law of cause and effect, karma. A lot of stuff that's happening right now needs to play itself out, you know? And I say this even, I mean, on part of it, I mean, part of me, like, that's maybe my Aquarius nature too. I'm having the best time of my life right now because everything I've talked about is becoming reality, and people kind of finally, you know, don't make us much
crazy anymore.
I'm not the crazy one anymore, exactly. Or we're not the crazy ones anymore.
But do you think, sorry, there was a quickening because of the Rona? Because it's true, if people are familiar with your work, it kind of sets the stage for all of this, because now we're seeing the Rona regime is accentuating everything that you've been saying, you know, whether it's soulless humans or psychic attacks.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I think there is a quickening happening. I mean, it sometimes reminds me also of, if you guys remember, Terence McKenna's theory about time wave zero, right? This novelty expanding, this quantum leap, and everything is quickening up exponentially, right? I see that's happening to a degree, absolutely. You know, and I think the Rona is the catalyst, so to speak, for the awakening. You know, I had an excellent podcast on my channel with, I don't know if you guys heard of Paul Levy and his book on work on Wetiko, right? Based on a Native American tradition that alien virus that has infused humanity, kind of relates to the Predator of Castaneda's work and the other occult teachings. Yeah, that podcast right there. So he also talks about, you know, in a sense, we talked about evil and Wetiko and these forces, these evil forces, and, you know, that they are trying to enslave humanity. So it's a disease, but the cure at the same time. And that's I found this, that's I had to come to grips to as well, because if you start first to awaken and get red pilled, you kind of have, you know, start to see evil, and you want to just you externalize evil, right? And you want to, like, we need to get rid of the psychopaths, they're destroying humanity, and fight and externalize. But from this high up, you have to see what levels you look at it from. You can look at it from the 3D matrix, 4D matrix, hyperdimensional, from the Jungian perspective of the psyche, shadow, or the evolution of consciousness. You know, I'm very much influenced, very much have read a lot and studied of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, which, you know, is not your typical type of yoga. He was, for me, the last master avatar who has incarnated this earth. But all these esoteric traditions also talk about the teaching function of evil, right? Because if you think of it, and that's a paradox our egoic mind cannot grasp, because we're caught in this duality, right? In this separation mindset, that evil in a sense is also, because all is one, right? All is in the mind of God, and evil is experiencing itself, you know, God experiencing itself subjectively, the dark side of creator, right? So it is hard to reconcile these paradoxes in the mind, obviously, but it has a teaching function, right? And even these forces which have attacked humans, work through humans, attack us, I also realized they only can get to us where they have entry points, right? And entry points are related to our blind spots, shadow aspects, traumas, wounds, and wherever. So, you know, any esoteric teacher tells you that you can utilize evil or these forces, negative forces, as teachers, because they highlight your issues, right? Similar what's happening with the Rona, like people that freak out, they, you know, we know how the matrix works on the basic level. It tags into the fear of people. That's how people are easily controlled, right?
Yeah, that's the real virus.
Exactly. Fear is the virus. So, you know, that's a great teaching, like face your fear. And what is fear based on? Any fear you have is based on the fear of death. So that's why in an esoteric teaching or ever culture, and teach you meditate on death. Like Don Juan said, carry death always on your shoulder. Or Goethe said, the moment you're born, you live on borrowed time. So it helps to contemplate on death, not to get a nihilistic in fear of death, but it keeps you sharp. It values your time. It keeps you focused on what truly matters. If you would contemplate that you could die any moment. right? So we can use the fear of death to be more focused, to be more courageous, and do what's really needed and necessary and what truly matters, and not get distracted with trivial stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, I love that. And you know what you were saying earlier too reminded me on the show. I always say something to the effect that, you know, universe is not doing this to you, it's doing this for you. And so it's that understanding here that all of these events are happening for a reason. And you just pointed out a big one too, in order to point out where you need to do the work. So those entry points. So if you have a crack in your shield, that evil can go through, if only to show you, hey, you have a crack in your shield. You might want to fix that. And I agree with you. A lot of the conversations on our shows and the past channels I've had, we talked about how difficult it is to understand that the evil that we see outside, we tend to externalize it, as you say, but really they're only fractals of ourselves that need healing. So that conversation, we could do a whole show just on that.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you bringing that in, and I want to tie that in right now to let's call it the matrix of, how do I say it? Extraction, the energy extraction matrix of control. Let's call it that for lack of better terms here on the planet. We live in this system that is siphoning off this life source of ours in many different ways, and people are just now starting to, as you say, open up their eyes or awaking to all that, whether that's from the food they eat, the drugs they take in, the movies, the music, and all of that stuff. What would you say to the audience is the first part in disconnecting from that matrix? Because typically if you go to the hospital and you're bleeding, the doctor will say, okay, well, first we have to stop the bleeding and then we'll start addressing the issue. How do you stop that bleeding? How do you disconnect from that energy extraction matrix? What would you tell the audience?
You mean you talk about the hyperdimensional matrix more, that uses humans as a food source, so to speak? Then
yes,
the topic of all topics, as they call it.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, just to put context, I mean, it really goes back to, like, just as an analogy, The Matrix, the film, which we can agree is a documentary at this point, right? So to speak. So when the shock, like Gurdjieff would call it the horror of the situation, when Neo wakes up and unplugs himself and sees these human fields being food for the machines through the life force. And that's really what humanity is for hyperdimensional forces. Right. When we just focus on the 3D matrix, the Bill Gates, the Faucis, the Rockefellers, whatever, the psychopaths in power, they themselves are just puppets for hyperdimensional forces. They are, incarnations. They are probably controlled by higher level draconian reptilian entities, really demonic beings that use human vessels to work through, right? So just, they almost, it's kind of like Star Wars. Remember Star Wars, the Emperor who wants Luke to get angry at him, right? That's just because he feeds off the anger. So when we just project our anger and disgust on just the person, whatever you want, as I just mentioned, be it Fauci, be it Bill Gates, be it whoever, in the elite, this is what the entities feed off, right? Your projected anger, your disgust, right? So the more we project that's food for them, energetic food. And food is not just physical food, consciousness is food. So they feed off of all our projected lower emotional energy. Ties also into, sexuality is a whole other topic in itself, but they feed off of lower sexual lust, anything of the lower nature, right? They feed off of. They feed off of people fighting each other and hating each other, right? That's why the modus operandi of the matrix on that level is divide and conquer, right? Working through both sides. You see it even the left versus the right, and all of that. And I would say right now, the left definitely has been more hijacked by these entities. For me, they're the expressions of the occult forces. But you don't want to get caught up in the left versus right paradigm. This is beyond that, right? And why I see conservatives and rights have maybe more rational mind, but they can easily also get in their own shadow projections and play the shadow dance of left versus right.
So can I interrupt and just
Go ahead.
Ultimately, this goes back to self-awareness, goes back to know thyself, goes back with the Rona regime. I've seen more than ever, and I've said this before, how our beliefs really do paint our reality. If you're going to be out there with your face diaper, navigating the streets, like putting a sanitizer and just like, then that becomes your life. So did you know there was this many dumb people, Bernhard?
What,
Yeah.
what was the quote from Einstein? He said, "There's two things of certainty in this world. One was the expanding universe, and the other one was the human's capability of being
Yeah.
stupid." And he was only sure about the latter, not the
Yeah.
first one.
You know,
But,
that's a good.
Because
Go ahead.
everything you're saying is a filter that one must see through, or else they can't even comprehend if they don't have a sense of self-awareness.
Right,
So
exactly. Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. I think a lot of people, you know, I'm in contact with, and Laura, my wife, and I, we also have, you know, courses and online where we do deeper work. And if people are kind of, a lot of people are frustrated exactly for that. Why doesn't anybody see what's going on? It's so fucking obvious, right? But you have to, that's when you have to understand, have to have deeper esoteric or occult knowledge, so to speak, understanding the bigger picture. Because the biggest mistake people make is that the assumptions that everybody is the same, and we project our soul potential into others who simply do not have it, right? That's the biggest mistake, you know. And you cannot, it should be very obvious by now that you cannot convince people by logic, reason, and facts alone. If that would be the case, we would already be enlightened, right? I feel on some level. If just common sense is not common anymore. That's what it comes down to, right? But you have to understand that vast different levels of being. Level of being means soul integration, level of awareness and consciousness, right? And the esoteric teacher Gurdjieff even said 100 years ago that the difference of level of being between two human beings can be as vast as different as the level of being between a plant and an animal. So that's quite vast, right? So we're dealing, you know, there's another topic of all topics, which ties into the topic of, which I've written a whole essay around that as well, based on various resources. And MARYAM mentioned it before, organic portals, soulless humans. Then not everybody has an individualized soul, that the majority of people are mechanical, automated programs. Just no self-awareness, just simply programs based on social conditioning, cultural conditioning. They have no individualized self. They're connected to a herd hive mind, so to speak, you know, and that's the consensus state, right?
What some people would call non-player characters.
Exactly, and NPCs, exactly, right? Yeah. So you cannot convince these people. They're just literally like NPCs, right? And it's mirrored in various esoteric traditions. Laura, my wife, she studies and teaches evolutionary astrology. It's very fascinating, esoteric type of astrology. In evolutionary astrology, they talk about also these states. They talk about in humanity a dimly evolved state, a certain percentage of people. Then the consensus state, 70% of humans, which is most people, they're like in the hive mind, right? A status quo, no individualization. And then the individuated state, which is actually maybe only 20% of humanity. And then the next state is spiritualized state, a more higher evolved, almost enlightened state.
What's individuated? How do you
individuated, meaning like you have separate yourself from the crowd. You become more connected to your essence, soul embodiment, soul individualization, right? I mean, you're connected to source. You're not
following the herd.
You're not following the herd. You cannot be taken in because you're strong in your own being, so to speak, right? But the key point to understand that this, like I mentioned before, that there's nothing wrong in reality. This is the natural path of the evolution of consciousness. So you know, it's very tempting, and I'm not taking myself out of the equation, to get very frustrated and upset about the sheeple and the stupid people, right? But we have been there too at some point in our evolution in past lives, right? Yeah. When you think of it, right? It's just consecutive, or, you know, that's why I feel I've written an article about it 5 years ago. What we're really experiencing right now is the splitting of humanity, right? There won't be a collective awakening anytime soon. Now, the New Age has distorted it, and I think this whole 5D, 12D, and all this nonsense, kind of very like woo-woo stuff, too much like where people can overestimate themselves. It's not that drastically that we move on to another planet or something like that. But a different reality also, you know, there's truth to the idea, right? That also the reality you experience is a mirror of your inner self, based on the Hermetic principle, as within, so without, as without, so within, right? So I feel what we're experiencing right now is a splitting of humanity, and not everybody's going to experience the same reality. And that's why is the work so important when I talk the esoteric, the inner work, to come in alignment with your soul, with your essence, to be guided by that, because we need to really also not only prepare internally, but externally as well. And many of us are then called to maybe move somewhere else, to connect with other people, right? So we need to follow that calling, because that's where we're needed, so to speak. But we're way beyond the point of trying to convince others, right? It's also infringement of free will from an esoteric perspective, or there's a saying, only give when it's asked for. So you have to respect people's free will to stay asleep, to go along with whatever they go along with. And that's just the way it is, right? What we can do, what I do, what you guys do with our work is spread seeds of awareness, right? Some may blossom, some may pick the grass, but you cannot force people to awaken. I mean, look at your own life. No one has forced you to awaken, like to stuff information down your throat and all of this. No, it needs to come from an inner calling, and goes back to the original discussion we had at the beginning. There's an esoteric axiom almost. Most people only start to awaken and question if they severely suffer, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is how the human species learns. And I agree with you. We've said that between us, that it's like at this point regarding the Rona, it's either, where people, it's no use trying to, tell them not to take the jab. In 2013, what would come to me, which I've mentioned before, is like there's an abyss that's forming between the people that are awake and the people that are asleep. And ostensibly now we see this like alternative reality between the right and the left, where they're like the deadly insurrection or the big lie. It's like it's completely inverted with the help of ministry of truth.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's a lot of people that's just their, if they don't see, they'll just go back to the earth? Like Amazing Polly said, like by now, if you don't see it, maybe it's best if you just go back to the earth.
What do you mean by going back to the earth?
Die.
Oh, okay.
Like if there is a Genesis program and there is a group of people who are trying to wake others up, by now, like maybe it's their karma or their calling to just.
That's true. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, again, death is very mysterious. Here's the thing, right? We can always speak out against injustices, and the whole justice warrior leftist agenda is based on like just victim identification and standing up for the victim, right? And that's, we need to get out of it, right? To really like take self-responsibility, because the leftist agenda, is clearly anti-divine, completely against spirit, against God, in all of that, obviously, right? And on that note, because I used to I had my own social justice warrior back in the days of standing up for the victim. I was an activist for Palestine and against the Zionists and all of that, finding good. But then I realized when I got deeper, I asked myself, what do I really know about the soul lesson about somebody else on a deeper karmic? What do I know when I'm still figuring out my own? I have no clue. Who am I to judge, right? So death is very, and all of how people are suffering is, again, I don't want to use use karma as an excuse, because that has been very distorted and oversimplified and all of it. But there's truth to karma. It's the law of cause and effect, as simple as that, without judgment, right? And past lives and all of that, what all comes in, because as I said before, we cannot see possibly with the eyes of the divine, right? So that's the question, like, that's a good question to ask. Like sometimes, whoever, checks out or takes the thing, whatever, because I feel that's part of the whole depopulation agenda anyway, and all of this, it's been coming. It's been written on the wall, so to speak, so it's no surprise. But ultimately, from a higher perspective, from a soul perspective, that's also my attitude. all these are lessons, and there's even no good or bad experiences. The ego likes to judge it as a bad experience. And I can even look into our lives. Even Maryam, you look at, all the past relationships, these are bad experiences. But if you look back at it, you learn from it. It was not just a bad experience. It was a necessary lesson, like a rite of passage, like an initiation. And that's how we really have to see it, instead of getting this victim. We're caught in this, guys. I'm sure you guys have heard of the drama triangle. We're caught in this drama triangle of victim, perpetrator, and savior, right? We all move around it. So we need to go beyond it, right? And see it from a higher perspective. And for me, most importantly, what I realize, what has shifted a lot over the past years, is my relationship to the divine, to God, what I mentioned before, to align with something higher, what I would call divine will. There's a higher will we need to align ourselves with, right? Which transcends our mental understanding and whatnot. But to get there, we need to do the inner work without spiritual bypassing, because that can be very tempting as well.
Right. Let me bring up an audience, a video I did. Let me see if I can bring this one off there. Okay, there you go. This Beyond Disclosure episode with Dr. Richard Allen Miller, he said something absolutely fabulous to me, and it struck me to my core. We were talking about, as MARYAM was saying, those people who are wearing their masks alone in their car. And he says, well, hold on a second, Jean-Claude. He says, we have to be compassionate for them, because we can't get off. He says, me personally, I can't get off this rock until each and every one of you do what you're supposed to do, because you are me and I am you. So I was like, oh yeah. So it brings a whole different focus on having that compassion for your fellow friend. But at the same time, where I'm still struggling with some of this understanding myself is when I woke up to all of this, and just I'll share a little bit of personal story here too. I was watching guys like Alex Jones, right? Rah, 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 they're lying to us, blah, blah. That frequency of anger, that first frequency when you wake up, and you just mentioned it, it's very easy for people to get trapped in that negative frequency as they're waking up. And you have to eventually move away from that and become more and more focus maybe on the positive things, on changing and healing yourself, and looking at how to build the future you want to build, and creating abundance for yourself, as opposed to focusing on that negativity that Alex Jones is so good at pointing at, right? Yeah. So you go through that process, and at a certain point, you're so excited because you've just discovered something and you want to share it with everyone. And you realize, as Bernhard was saying, you can't force people to wake up, and they're going to look at you like you're absolutely crazy. But it's not the fact that you're crazy. It's just because it's not their time yet. It's not their soul contract. It's not their soul mission. It'll happen when it happens. You can sow the seed, as you said, but you can't force them. So eventually you have to consolidate. Well, okay, I'll do what I have to do. If people ask, we'll share the information. And then, so that's another step of evolvement. And it takes a while to go through all of these steps as you're doing it for yourself. So I'm sure a lot of the audience is resonating with that. But one of the questions I have for you too is, again, in the last number of years here, all of this New Age spirituality has been hijacked on many levels. We can agree to that. This whole idea of the ascension process, or this division between the 3D, the 4D, and the 5D and all that, I was always thinking, well, how is that going to happen? On one hand, I agree, because I'm like, well, I'm living in a reality that is not my neighbor's reality. Absolutely, right? And so are you. And I'm like, I cannot continue to interfere in their reality because I'm a thorn. They look at me and it's like, oh, I can't stand it. He's telling me things I don't want to hear, right? And at the same time, they can't keep interfering in my reality also. So I always wondered, how is this division going to happen? In the Bible, they talk about separating the wheat from the chaff, and there's all of these teachings. And then when this happened last year, I'm like, oh, it's a self-selecting, in a way, division based on your soul contracts and your soul mission. And then when you look at it that way, suddenly the picture is very different. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like it ties with the biblical saying, many are called for, but few choose to answer the call, right? So that's another thing. It's just you choose by stepping up to the plate. It doesn't happen by itself, right? So it happens also, like it also very much relates to soul resonance. Which is for me the true secret of, quote, reality creation, right? I'm not talking about this, quote unquote, the secret, the New Age distortion, which is manifesting, focusing on positive thoughts and visualizing your desired outcome and emotions into that. No, it's beyond what our ego wants, right? Most of the desires is also being detached from desire. That's another thing, right? There's a great saying, I'm sure you guys heard maybe of Adyashanti. He said something, I'm paraphrasing, and he said, many people talk that they want to awaken, but they don't really want to awaken. What they really want is be happy in their dream state, right? So there's a very huge difference between awakening and then really, still being attached to your desires and wanting things a certain way and all of that. And nothing against desires, right? I mean, It's fine and good, but it's about the attachment to it and wanting a certain outcome. I have my intention, I have dreams, I have certain desires, but I'm not attached to it, because if I have one lesson I learned over my life is that the saying applies, tell God your plans and he will laugh at you. Because I didn't consciously plan to do what I'm doing. Remember, I wanted to be a rock star, right? So that didn't work out.
I was in politics before. So
you are a rock star.
There's a big no.
No, but I mean, a lot. What I'm saying, that also came from my wounding. wanting to show my bullies in high school, fuck you, I'm going to make it.
Right.
So a lot of what I've realized in myself, and a lot of people I've worked with, clients over decades, is that a lot of people's needs and desires and wants they have is not coming from a true self. It's coming from the wounded, conditioned, traumatized self as a compensation, right, to fill a hole within, or socially, culturally conditioned to look a certain way, to get attention and whatnot, whatever it may be, right? And as long as we have that, we are plugged into the matrix. Going back to your question, how to answer questions, to resist that, right? To not give in to that, to not react mechanically, right? To not give them the food they want, not to act from our lower nature, which is very, very hard to resist. Yeah, exactly.
But can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, of course.
Bernhard, so in your work recently, when you're working with people, what are some patterns that you're seeing working with strange people, or if you're still doing coaching, or even like comments that you see that are outside the scope of your following or your audience? Like are there people waking up more and more? What's some observations?
That's a good question. What I've noticed is definitely more people are drawn to my work, and then because I've kind of shifted away from one-on-one sessions, we're doing more these courses to give this 10-week course we have right now to give people a deeper foundation. And I've seen, people sign up who have been following my work and Laura's work for a while, but also people who have really like quote unquote red pilled over the past 2 years, right? Of what's happening in the world. And mostly what people are experiencing, that's actually an excellent question. Remember I talked before about the consensus state versus the individuated state. So a lot of people that are waking up are still in the consensus state, meaning they're very attached to their old lives, to their families and friends they have, but now they're quote waking up. They cannot, they see the splitting within their families, with their friends, they start to individuate, right? But they're still trying to hold on to the old life and never had a really hard time letting go. And and that's not easy. The individuating process or the awakening process, as going back to Adeshanti, is a destructive process. People think this whole awakening journey is like, oh, I'm going to awaken. It's bliss, love, and light, and it's kind of hype this day, like I'm going to do it, yeah. But the true awakening process brings everything up you have ever ignored, brings everything out of the shadows, right? From this life, your trauma, your childhood, everything you looked away, everything you escape from, mostly unconsciously, will be put up into front of your face, because that needs to be faced in order to cross the threshold. They talk it as esoteric science, to really reunite with your true self, right? So that's what most people are struggling with. So in my work, going back to your question, I see definitely on a positive note that a lot of people are starting to question waking up, but they also need the guidance. I think a lot of us have done the groundwork, right? So we're also being called upon, to step into leadership, not like authoritarian, but help people in the way in the way we have already been through, so to speak. In the end, I see we're all teachers and students alike, right? But people who are more individuated can help people from the consensus state to become more individuated, right? Because that's how the evolution of consciousness works. But again, in alignment with free will, right? Not infringing and spreading the seeds and only given as asked for. But I've also noticed, what's very important on this path is sincerity, integrity, and humility. Those three aspects are very key. Because in sincerity, what I mean with that, how sincere are you with yourself? Not actually necessarily with others, right? But with yourself, meaning how honest are with yourself, because we can easily lie to ourselves, right? I always said, it's easier to detect the lies out there and the matrix and all of that, as opposed to the lies that you're telling yourself, right? To stay in your comfort zone and in denial and whatnot. That's also why, by the way, there's only so much self-work you can do on your own, because we need reflection. We need others who can mirror us back, right? To point out our blind spots as well. It is needed. Right, and sometimes being quote unquote called out, so to speak. That's a true role of a guru back in the days, anyway, or a teacher, right? Right. So it is not an easy path. So it requires a certain also warrior attitude. I think that's what I'm trying to get. We are called to be spiritual warriors in that sense, and that requires a certain fearlessness, a certain courage to really face it. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about being a warrior. In order to be a good warrior, you have to be able to put out a lot of energy. And a lot of our energy, again, is being extracted by, many layers here in this matrix. Last year, I produced this series called The K-Files, Kundalini Secrets Revealed. And Penny Kelly said in that show, perhaps for humanity to understand this energy source and to not only disconnect from the matrix, but to then be able to empower themselves with that energy. And of course, we're talking about sexual energy, Kundalini, Chi, Prana, whatever you want to call it. She said, that's the last gate to our freedom, is to understand that. But what happens is that looks all pretty. And for a lot of people, I think, okay, this is it. This is going to be the best show I've ever done. But yet, nobody wanted to listen. Why? Because a lot of them were triggered as soon as you said the word sex. Oh, no. They got triggered by all of these programs that distort the use and the comprehension of this innate energy and power source that we have. How do you bring that into your context and your work and your courses on how to empower people to maybe first recognize maybe some of those old malfunctioning programs, those old distortions around our sexuality, how to overcome them, and then how to rebuild that energy source to apply it to everything we've just talked about, the awakening process, going through the past traumas, the wounds, and rebuilding our relationships. What can you share with the audience here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself, sexual energy, because that's also the distortion of sexual energy is also one of the modus operandi of the matrix, how we're being controlled. Obviously, you see it's to the paradox as well. You know what I mean? I remember I come from Germany, Europe, which is more quote unquote liberal. Like I saw, let's say, titties on TV when I was a teeny, no big deal. My parents went to the Mediterranean and to the lakes. People were naked, no big deal. It's just a part of culture, right? So I grew up. Now I come to the US, right? I remember in a speech back in the days, the land of the free, I'm naked on the beach, I get a ticket. Like, what is it? Like, I didn't even get it, right? I cannot drink, in Germany, also, I can drink my beer anywhere. Nobody's getting carded here. I'm getting ticketed for being naked at the beach, drinking a beer, right? Like, right. But at the same time, in the US, you have the billboards and advertisement, and everything is completely sexualized more than a year, right? In TV and advertisement, is sex sells, right? So it creates sexual frustration by having this like almost, very conservative way of showing yourself in public and whatnot. But then you're bombarded by these images, right? But that's how they operate, right? So to speak, to create sexual frustration within yourself. So, and then it comes out distorted and then results in all kinds of sexual pathologies that become normalized, especially nowadays, right? And now that's a very tricky topic because I have a lot of issues with the so-called Tantra movement, especially in Kali, especially the polyamory, movement. And first of all, to each their own. I don't care what you're doing, right? Right. But for me, there's such a thing that may trigger some people, but there's such a thing as sacred sex, right? There is just a spiritualization of the lower nature. And I feel a lot of the Tantra movement, what they do, tantric sexual exercise, is a distortion of true Tantra. My wife, she studied she's a Tibetan Buddhist and has studied the true tantric teaching. And the sexual energy aspect is maybe 5%. Tantra is a way of life. And people get hooked on this Tantra and moving the energy around. And I have done all of that as a man, like non-ejaculatory, do the sexual Qigong, move up the energy, all of that. But what I realized, if I was honest and sincere with myself, I got hooked on the energy. I got hooked on the Jing, on the high. So I was also then, I see a lot of people in this sexual Tantra New Age movement spiritualizing their sexual addiction, right? So to speak.
That's awesome.
So ultimately, it's about truly transmuting it, because what is sexual energy on this coarse form? It's creative energy. That's all that is. Right. Yeah. So you can easily, Sri Aurobindo called it the vital energy, the lower vital. You can get hooked on the vital energy and just play around with it and lie to yourself that you're using it for spiritual purposes. But that's also what entities feed off of, right? Regardless how you want to see it. And obviously we also need to work through there's a lot of sexual shame and all of that. So I'm not implying to shame. I'm not about demonizing sexuality. I'm not now going the other extreme of the Christian view that flesh is sin and all of this, and you should be completely abstinent and all of that. To each their own, they're different soul lessons. You know what I mean? I'm not telling anybody what to do. But there's for me a big red flag if I see tantrics, tantra teachers, selling their whatever appearance to lure people in with their sexual energy already. That's a red flag, right? That's for me like entity interference right there, right? And all of that, what people crave or give attention to. Right. So it is a stage maybe to work with that, right? But ultimately, it's going beyond that, moving beyond that, and transcending the sexual impulse to really connect it to a higher level of creative energy. And I notice in myself, the more I'm creatively engaged, the less I have a sexual desire, so to speak, right? The more I disconnected from a creative energy, the more I disconnected from essence, then I can see my lower nature arising as well. And even, lust and all of that. And I'm not going to judge myself or beat myself up for it. It is what it is, but what these entities feed off of, right? Right. And temptation is the name of the game. The Matrix works over 3 temptations. What are the 3 temptations known in history? It's greed, power, and sex or lust, right? Yeah. And you don't want to demonize all 3 of them. That's the trap of the aesthetics, kind of like to reject all of that. No, there's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with abundance, just the love and the greed for it. I'm all for abundance, and money is energy. There's nothing wrong with power. We want to empower ourselves, but if you use power over others and feed off yourself and feed off the attention, that's how you feed the occult forces. There's nothing wrong with sex. But when we get into the lust and spiritualize our lower nature, we're getting trapped as well, right? So it's bringing it to a higher level.
So many of those schools, and you just mentioned California. I've had some people on the show here before too who said, JC, be very careful with these people because they're talking a high spiritual game, but at the end of the day, all of these teachings are all about getting into your pants, so to speak, or being hooked, as you said, on the energy, as opposed to doing the work within. And in my series with Rihanna, we had entitled it Sacred Sex, the Healer Within. The purpose, at least the first purpose, was to go through that internal healing yourself, so that then you can use that energy for this creative process that you're talking about now. And that's very different than what a lot is being taught in some of these tantric schools that you're talking about. I like to see it from the Taoist perspective because they also talk about the healing part of this energy. Anyways, we could do another 2-hour show on that one, and that's very good. But again, I like what you just said there too, because so many people are distorted by these old programs that even hearing this information, they kind of get distracted, disoriented, and misguided by some of these teachings. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot there for a lot of people, if anything, just to heal those old programs that give them the shame, the guilt, all of these frequencies that are not conducive for them in their awakening process and in their healing process. So at the very least, for the audience members, if you can think about it that way and take little bites, maybe you'll be better for it, because it is a big part of that broken view mirror for a lot of us. And again, it goes to our childhood and a lot of our programming. Go ahead, Maryam.
So sorry. I remember that Bernhard introduced me to forget about sexually transmitted diseases. How about sexually transmitted demons?
Right.
And it really resonated, given that we were talking about love bites. And I've never had a one-night stand, and I've always kind of grappled with this like alter ego of mine. But when it comes down to it, not wanting to, not judging it, just like it's sacred. I'm sacred, and I don't want to have that energy enter me if there isn't more, or if I don't, especially having learned and picking up entities. I believe that way, because that's another way that they feed off you. And I am sad that there's so little sacredness on this earth from my point of view. Maybe that sounds like a negative statement, but I just think there's so much more room for reverence and looking at things in a sacred way that includes sex.
Yeah. Go ahead. Do you want to add to that, or we
I mean, I have a whole article on that. What Maryam just mentioned. Sexual transmitted demons or sex entities, attachments through sex, and all of that. Which is more common than people are aware of. There's no such thing as casual sex. If you go to my writings under articles, then there you can find it somewhere. Yeah, scroll down. Yeah, on the right bottom.
Sexual vampirism, this one.
Sex and entity attachments. Yeah, so all that.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, it's just almost common sense. If you're sensitive to energetics, if you intimately become intimate with somebody on a sexual level, you exchange energies on a very deep, intimate level. There's no such thing as casual sex. So you take on a lot of stuff what the other person is carrying, right? And that's why, I mean, you know, we live in the dark ages, the Kali Yuga. Anything is reversed, inverse. I said it before. A lot of you know, sexual pathologies are becoming normalized. You see this even what was it, the 50 Shades of Grey, or that film, whatnot, right? I mean, they become pretty popular. That's pathology becoming normalized. You see it with the whole sexualization of children and all of this weirdness that's happening also from the progressive left, right? This is also pathology becoming normalized. And going back to, like, you know, I feel like you hear about Christian values, for example, don't have sex before you get married and all of that. And there's truth in that. And what that simply means, it's not to be uptight until you're truly married, but there's a symbolism behind it, in sense of truly know a person first before you jump in bed with them, right? You need to get out of this Tinder culture, really know who this person is, you know what I mean, before you you know, decide to exchange energy with that person. And on that note, you can also, it can be very tempting, because on a basic biological level, you can be attracted sexually to somebody who is not a good match for you at all, right? And then also, like, I know victims of sexual abuse and whatnot, you know, they can be actually more sexually active in a sense, because they haven't healed their trauma. That's why you see in the porn industry, most people who work, quote unquote, work there, they're emotionally disconnected, but they're victims, most of them, of sexual abuse, right? So it's kind of keeps going over cycles and cycles like that.
Right. Speaking of cycles, we can do this whole show on the yugas as well. I just had this really amazing show with Jay Widener a couple of months ago, and we talked about Fulcanelli's Le Mystère des Cathédrales and how that all pertains to the Great Cross of Hendein, and it talks about all of these cataclysmic events on Earth. Maybe we could come back to you at another point and talk about that as well. Let's go back here on the hyperdimensional entities. You mentioned at the beginning of the show, and Maryam also, the ideas of these narcissists and how the human body in a lot of cases is being taken over by the Dracos, as you said, some other entities, to maybe act upon and to, I guess, siphon off this energy from other humans. Now, let's get into that personality type of the narcissist, and perhaps the idea that they themselves are being controlled by other entities, and so that you have basically a third-party agent using a human body to get to another person. A lot of the people here might not be aware that it works in that way, and in many other ways as well, but let's give them some tips and tools to maybe recognize the people around them who are engaged or maybe working on behalf, whether they know it or not, by these hyperdimensional entities who are, of course, not looking for their highest interest.
So you've been able to recognize them, so to speak, or that's tricky, because you know, I have sometimes conflict within myself, because I'm not against labeling. We can throw around labels very easily, and I see even nowadays the label narcissist being thrown out very easily as well. And first thing I want to point out, when people are dealing with narcissists on some level, also take responsibility for your part, because there's, like Maryam mentioned before, there's a reason why you attracted to a narcissist, and that's your full responsibility, you know. Be it a codependent issue, you know. The word empath is also being used very distorted in this sense. It's being used as an excuse. Oh, I'm so sensitive, I'm an empath, you know, and like, and all of these things. And you know, one of my teachers said something very, very, that put me also in my place, because I'm also very sensitive. I would call myself an empath, and always like, I'm too sensitive for the world, and I take on people's energy and whatnot. And my teacher then said, he put me straight, he said, like, you know what, Bernhard, there's no such thing as oversensitivity. There's only lack of embodiment. So the more you lack, the more, you know, if you're fully integrated, soul integrated and grounded in your body, you can still be sensitive, tune into other people, but other people are not affecting you whatsoever. Right. And that's the work to be done for empaths. For empaths who are too sensitive, meaning they have a leaky aura, they're not truly embodied, they're not grounded. So there needs more work to be done. Right. But it's
sorry, can I ask you, how about let's say interference of, like, I'm in San Francisco right now, and I am an empath, and it's having an impact on my thoughts. Like, I'm not blaming, but I just was in Mount Shasta. I saw how I was, and I'm back here, and I feel the electromagnetic. So I'm not blaming it, but I think there is something to epigenetics. What do you think?
Yeah. First of all, I would ask, what the hell are you doing in San Francisco? But that's a different question.
Yes.
From Mount Shasta to, well, that's right. I mean, especially in cities like that, it has an effect on us. So we sometimes need to then take physical measures, right, to protect ourselves, to get out of the city or something. And with thoughts is also being able to reject it, like knowing this is not myself, right? I mean, I work a lot of rejection, not identifying with thoughts, so to speak, and upping the self-care, right? That needs to happen, right? Doing your meditations, protective prayers and visualizations. I do, walking, like simple things like walking barefoot in nature, taking, clearing with water, salt, and all of that. And grounding exercises are key, self-clearing exercises. I'm a big fan of Qigong, that helps me a lot, which is kind of, you do energy work on yourself, so to speak, that help me to stay grounded.
Right.
And many other things. So I would, when you're in situations like that, I hear you. So it's just a matter of taking more self-care. But if you're in an area like this nowadays, I mean, Frisco is taken over by entities at this point, no?
I know. I know. I was just bringing up the point that it's a balance of not, you don't want to like, oh, woe is me, I'm so sensitive, but there is also the reality that we are impacted by our environment more than most realize.
Yeah, that's actually came up. We had a group call with the course we're hosting today. I brought up the topic also of environmental consciousness, right? That other places and areas and houses, whatever, contain already a certain energy, which you also tap into, so which can affect us definitely. But still, the rule applies. It only can affect us where there's an entry point, right? So either we have a weakness within us, a leakage, that's where it gets into, And ultimately, Sri Aurobindo said, if you're truly embodied, I mean, the higher state, you can be in the middle of a war field that wouldn't affect you, right? Obviously, we're not on that high level of being and an embodiment, and so we need to take measures to protect ourselves. And I feel in this day and age, it goes both. It's twofold, right? We need to find a play. For me, like, I left LA, right? It was just getting too much for Laura and myself. It's just like, I need to get the hell out of here. So we moved to a small town here in Arizona, in nature more. And and so I think that what I'm trying to say is, needs to both the inner work, like protecting yourself, cleaning yourself, but also in a practical manner, taking care of your physical surroundings.
Let's ask 2 questions here, the audience. So first of all, it's so funny too. There's like 10 people in the chat already said, hey, we need to do the show for 2 hours. I'm like, well, we actually booked 2 hours for the show, which is odd for me, because we knew we would have a lot to discuss. So folks, hang on. There's a lot more coming your way, and hopefully more time for questions as well. But there's 2 here that are related to the topic. The first one, it's off my screen now, but somebody was asking whether or not alcohol was also a gateway to bringing in maybe some of these hyperdimensional entities. And a lot of native traditions, in French here, they call esprit or spirits. They talk about, spirits come true when you use these substances.
Low level.
Absolutely.
To the audience.
Alcohol, absolutely low level, connects you to the lower astral realm. I cannot drink alcohol anymore. I mean, I never really did anyways. It just really puts me in, it kind of gets me giggly, but I can also actually, when I'm very sensitive, it also activates my lower nature. I can sense when my sexual center gets activated. It's more like lust, and like, that's why it's the favorite drug. It is a drug in the sense in bars, right? The pickup culture, right? It lowers your defenses. I mean, bars and nightclubs are like feeding fest for entities. These people under control of yourself. If people who drink themselves silly and have a blackout and don't remember, during that time they're completely overtaken by an entity. It's like they become like it's like a vehicle. Those entities go on a joyride, so to speak. But alcohol is definitely on a lower astral level. And I don't want to demonize it again. I'm not saying that a beer here and there or a glass of wine is like, oh my God, I'm going to possess. I'm not that extremist,
I am.
But it can happen with pot as well, by the way. I like my cannabis, but that can also open up the astral realm. It can also any psychedelics. I mean, I have a whole article on ayahuasca. That's a whole other. You can bring an entity attachments and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a elder at the Yakima tribe who had told me once that one of his students was a recovering alcoholic, and when he had gone through some of these steps and was more embodied and could see more what was happening around him, he went back to visit some of these local drinking holes or bars that he used to attend, and he could literally see a line of individuals, disembodied individuals, waiting in line to pop in to human bodies who were using the alcohol in the bar. So that's a graphic for you right there. The second question was from Ronnie. Any truth about mirrors being portals for demons?
Oh, that's interesting. You know what? I remember, like, when I was living in my old house in Topanga, that I worked with this teacher before I came into my life, this healer. She helped me a lot, and in my own process when I was going through a lot. And she came. She didn't stop doing it, but she did an exception for myself. She came to my house to do a clearing. It was very needed. So she really taught me a lot how to tune in. So, for example, it's very fascinating. In my living room, I had a poster by, I'm sure people know the artist Alex Gray. Mm-hmm. Right, and some psychedelic paintings of the theologue, right? This guy meditating on this grid, the Himalayas and the fire from underneath. And she said, "You got to take this down. This is a portal for entities to come in, like even something like that." And she taught me, like, she's like, "Okay, go in front of the picture and stand like 6 feet away. Just close your eyes and feel, So just sense, and then." She now do it again. She takes the painting down or the poster, and all of a sudden, wow, I feel much lighter. When it was up, I felt the heaviness. I felt actually something coming through it. So it's not just, and then she also pointed out a mirror as well that was placed on my bathroom, and I was facing something, I brought back from Peru, from a Shipibo tribe, the fabric, the classical ayahuasca Shipibo art, right? What people like. And she also put me in front of that, and it was facing the mirror. And because of that, something else was coming through as well. So she said, you have to be very careful what you bring into your house, because everything carries energy. Who made this art? And we all, in my naive, New Age shamanic days, I'm like, almost like fashion, like take this psychedelic art and this and that and this eye candy, and not really tuning into the energy. So I got rid of a lot of stuff I brought back from the jungle, artwork and all of that, and be very more discerning what I put up into my room, right, as well. So that, that doesn't necessarily talk about mirrors. I think not every mirror, is necessarily a portal. It's more your whole arrangement in your house and the energy in it.
And what about people who might bring back figurines from Egypt and like tombs and crypts and, Maryam, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I ended up going into a tomb and
I remember you told me that. I remember that.
And being told, do you want this Shepti doll? And the Shepti basically replaced the psychic energy of a slave that was buried alive. And I became like Frodo and I was like, I have to have a piece of my heritage. And my precious. And then I started to have bad dreams, and it was like the Brady Bunch episode where you're not supposed to bring something back. But absolutely, when I walked in with the doll into my apartment, all of a sudden I could smell it, and I developed a very strange cough. And I mentioned that I think it had mold on it. But anyway, that's.
I heard of. By the way, that's also one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why I never buy anything from secondhand shops or secondhand clothes or anything like that. I don't want anything, especially clothes, somebody else. It doesn't matter how much you have washed it. You still, it carries the energy of somebody else, and I don't know the person. Mm-hmm. That's just me. Maybe I'm too paranoid, but
if I can just share a story that I was going through an exercise. I was going through abundance, like give money. And after my accident, I had a little bit money from the insurance. And there was this girl that I connected with, and she was an artist. And I purchased a huge, it was like $700. And to me, that was a lot to pay for art. And the picture was this girl that was kind of tilted. She had a limp. And after my accident, I had a limp for a long time. And she told me, I named her after my friend Rachel. So when I came home, my boyfriend was home, and I'm like, what should we call her? And he was, I don't know, Rachel. And I'm like, okay, her name is Rachel. Sorry that I tried to change her name. And then I put it up, and the energy was really dark, and I didn't want this painting. But I was an exercise in giving away, but I could really feel the negativity. And then like 6 months later, she called and she said, I'm really sorry, but I'm having an art exhibit, and I need that picture back. I'll pay you for it. And so it was like, I also believe if you keep your frequency at a certain level, because I've had bad, like dark people living over me, dark, not their color, but their soul. And just if you keep your vibration, you'll move it away.
Oh, that's, thank you for stating that. I want to point that it's very important this day and age, because there's a lot of people also freak out because of the jab, sorry, and or many other things, chemtrails, EMF, 5G, and all of that, right? And they can get very paranoid, like, I'm going to protect from all these rays. I certainly believe, and I experience that we can protect ourselves and transcend that. The more we soul and body, the more we keep our frequency high in relating to soul resonance. And I'm not talking in a new age term. It's not about just protective bubble or something, visualizing, or just staying in a positive mindset, which is maybe, yes, part of it, but not just in the new age way. But it relates again what I mentioned before. The more we do the great work, that's the alchemist work, right? Called the great work throughout the ages, which means to do the difficult inner work, to embody spirit, to connect for your true self, to make personality an expression of your essence. The more you integrate your soul, the more you higher your frequency, the stronger your aura gets, the more you're protected from all of that, right? Without needing to have all kinds of crystals around, or, or gemstones, or your, whatever protection you wear and put around. That's most of it. Maybe has a placebo effect, but definitely not as much of a protection as your soul embodiment.
Right, absolutely. Going to that, in some cases, they're like a béquille in French, a crutch, the protection and all that. And the idea is to transcend them. Sometimes you need that little kick, just like some plant medicine might give you a little kick, but you don't want to fall into the habit of needing the plant medicine to achieve the enlightenment with which you seek. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit here. We wanted to talk about love bite. And so a lot of people in this last 2 years, if you want to call it that, have been strained in their relationship because of that huge, in some cases, dichotomy of beliefs. Now, we've also talked here about the hyperdimensional entities that are maybe interfering with our energy, hence also in our relationships. How do you bring all that together here for the people who right now are in, how would I say it, are very much struggling in their relationships, and they don't maybe understand the underlying reasons why? They can see the surface, but they don't really understand what's happening below the surface. What would you say to them?
That's a good question. Well, with all these years, I mean, this love bite topic before, people because I've seen people even use that topic, love bite, relationship, hyperdimensional interference, as a bypass or excuse not to deal with basic relationship psychology and their own stuff first. People have distorted this based again on Eve Long's work, the whole concept of love bite relationships from its original meaning, which has certain aspects of it. But again, the esoteric law applies, axiom, that anything can only get to us where it has an entry point, right? And I've done this work, I mean, for over 2 decades, I've spoken about entity interference. I have a whole 8-hour webinar, by the way, on my website on this topic, Occult, Occult Forces of Hyperdimensions. There's a lot of talk about, in this entity topic, somebody just needs an exorcism or clearing, and then I feel fine and better. All of this is fine and good, but it's just a crutch because they come back tenfold if you don't heal the healing entry point. The same with love bite relationships, right? So what I can give advice, and Laura and I, we teach this in our courses as well, what people are missing in this day and age are basic relationship skills and basic understanding. It starts with basic psychology, basic understanding and application of shadow work based on Jungian psychology, right? Understanding your projections, especially in the romantic phase, which many people mistake for love, when you have all kinds of positive projections, the golden shadow onto the other person, which has nothing to do with the other person. And then the other person doesn't live up to it. And then you're disappointed and break up for the next romantic rush, right? So it's understanding basic psychology in terms of shadow work, understanding projections and triggers, and how triggers, when something upsets you or irritates you, emotionally especially upsets you has nothing to do with the person in front of you or the situation, but triggers something from the past within you, which is mostly related to some sort of childhood wound or trauma. And we're all traumatized to varying degrees. It doesn't have to be like a big T trauma, as they call it, like sexual abuse, physical abuse, drug abuse, and whatnot. But all of us are wounded to varying degrees because none of our parents were perfect. So none of our mats were truly met, right? And whatever, like, and also understanding basic psychology, however we grew up and we have been parented in the first 3 to 5 years of our lives sets up our adult life. And that's also the way our parents treated us and kind of, you know, met us. That's also what we attracted to unconsciously in our partners, our parental image, right? So that's really, so that's on the basis, I feel that's what really people need to apply is basic relationship psychology in light of shadow work, understanding how this works, right? Basic inner child work and how we unconsciously are drawn to that, but what we haven't made conscious of within ourselves, right? So that's
so
key
basic.
point. Right.
Sorry, it's so basic, but yet so many, just again, it goes back to knowing thyself and transcending blame. And it's not about like, I'm right, you're wrong.
Exactly.
It's about hearing each other and realizing nothing really happens in a vacuum. Different people bring out different facets of you. And if something comes up, look at it as an opportunity rather than a negative.
Right, exactly. You know, it's a teaching, you know, and you can actually, in a relationship, what's most important is the foundation. And a relationship, a conscious relationship, which by definition, no relationship is conscious. There's a paradox, right? Because we're drawn to what makes a relationship conscious, that we have an agreement that this relationship about growth. And whatever comes up, we take it as a responsibility and we're going to apply shadow work to learn about ourselves, to heal. Because you can use conflict, literally, you know, that's called in esoteric Christianity, the fifth way. Two polar couples use esoteric work, their relationship for esoteric work, and you can catalyze each other's development. Right. So even Laura and myself, we trigger each other. Sometimes trauma comes up, you know, sometimes it gets heated. But we use it as a catalyst, as an opportunity to work, to make the darkness conscious. And then it brings us even closer together. And even the love bond gets stronger, so to speak. So you can use an opportunity. The love bite comes in, right? When you're dealing with more personality disorders, borderline, narcissistic and whatnot, where then other entities can come in and take somebody over. But we ourselves can be taken over by something as well if they tag into our own stuff, right? So even Eve Lorgen talks about the whole love bite. Again, the whole the trap people fall into is, again, they blame victim. They blame their partner. Right? He's a narcissist. He's possessed by entities and this and that. But then the matrix has you already. You don't get the teaching lesson, right? Because in the end, it always takes two to tango, like I mentioned before. Like I've been through tremendous. And I shared an article I wrote about my life by the experience that nearly took me out. I killed myself. I deleted all my work. It was fucking intense, to say the least, right? I literally had to call my friend because I was, you know, I needed support because I had all these suicide and thought injections coming and dealing with all of that, right? But as I said before, I had, you know, it could easily just blame my partner being a demonic and possessed by demonic entities. And there's definitely something come through that was under hyperdimensional warfare. But with the help, you know, with Eve Lorgen's work and working with my teacher back then and all of that, and I took self-responsibility. And looking back, it was a rite of passage. It needed to happen. It was initiation. And the only way these forces could come through me in the love bite and working through my partner is because they tagged into my own stuff, you know, my own childhood wounding, issues of my mother, like basic stuff that was just heightened, right? What these entities do, they tag into your own stuff. As I had an interview of Jerry Masinski on my interview, who talks about this as well in light of schizophrenia and whatnot, relating schizophrenia to entity attachment. And he gave a good analogy how these entities work. They just put fuel onto the fire, right? So they come in, they exaggerate your issues, so to speak, which they find the entry point, and then feed off of that luge. That's what it comes down to. So really the only way to feel it is to heal yourself, to heal that wound, to do this deeper inner work. And then they have nothing to tag into and no other person can tag into.
Can you do something?
I just want to finish up because I just want to make this clear, because over the years, because I've seen this topic of entity attachment, love bite become very popular over the past 5 years, right? And there's so many distortions and there's so many, like, let's charlatans out there, so to speak, promising all kinds of like remote entity removal and all of that, and it really comes to, your own inner alignment, your inner work, and you can literally extract and clear yourself if you're sincere in that inner work.
Right. Very good. Maryam, you wanted to interject?
Oh, I was going to ask if you can outline a couple of characteristics of a love bite, in case someone is listening thinks they might be.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so there's certain symptoms that are really specific to the love bite, which was coined again by my colleague Eve Lorgan. So if anybody wants to understand, I highly recommend to read her books. She has 2 books, The Alien Love Bite and The Dark Side of Cupid, right? So one of the symptoms is, 2 persons fall madly in love. It's like the romantic phase, exponentially times 10. It's very intense. You like think this is the person of my life. You're gonna leave your partner right away, even if you have children. You're gonna move for that person right away, and would do anything to meet up. Right? It's just a strong longing, and you have even synchronicities. You have same dreams about this, and synchronicities happen, which are artificial, injected in. Synchronicities by these entities to make you believe it is meant to be. Very key to understand as well that synchronicity can be artificial to put you on the wrong path, and they usually appeal to ego. My colleague Tom Montauk, if people are familiar with work, he had made an excellent film on that about the different kinds of synchronicities, including false artificial synchronicities. So it gives you the whole impression that all appeals to your romantic notion of this overriding emotional center, mistaking that as love. Right. And then the way the love bite truly happens is then one person, all of a sudden then turns off, right? Is completely like not in love anymore and rejects the other person while the other person is still longing for it. And because of that friction, this other one person completely rejecting this unrequited love creates the friction and the luge for these entities to feed off, right? So that's kind of one symptom. And the other very symptom is very paranormal interferences, right? That can be like this whole like extreme, like that's also people have this, what people have love bites experience at first, this amazing sexual connection, which again is temptation, right? To feed in, to have this orgasm, cosmic orgasm, it's amazing. And like we had this best sex ever and all of that, but it's also artificially inured, right? And all of a sudden you experience something else is coming in the act, which I've experienced as well, right? A third entity, so to speak, and sleep paralysis and something else. So I had all these weird paranormal experiences as well during my love bite experiences. So that's another aspect. The paranormal aspect is very strong as well, right? Mm-hmm. But it's all fueled, especially this romantic phase, which we are so addicted to, which Hollywood tells us is the love. This is just, it's just very emphasized to say the least, so to speak, right? The emotional projections and all of that, and that we are irrationally drawn to the other person without hardly knowing the person, and then even making things up. So it's very prevalent in the New Age, right? Interesting, in the New Age, I saw the twin flame stuff. It's also extremely distorted, right? And I saw the symptoms of like when you meet your twin flame, and they're almost exact to the symptom of a love bite scenario, right? So it's kind of like it's so many red flags all over. And by the way, the twin flame scenario is a very gross distortion of an esoteric truth from the esoteric tradition called the unification of a polar couple of highly evolved people who do the work together, but you have to be on a certain level.
Divine union is very different.
Divine union, exactly. But it's very, very different than what the New Age talks about twin flames.
Right. Very good. Wow. Let me ask you this one. This was about 7 or 8 years ago. I experienced, now I didn't know the term love bite at that time, and I experienced something similar to that at a retreat. Okay. So, and after a day or two of trying to struggle, like, what's going on? One voice came into my head and said, Jean-Claude, just look for a second what's happening. And the voice said something to the effect, if somebody was going to attack you with all of your lacune, how do you say that in English? Your lacune, shortcomings, or your cracks in your shield, or your past traumas, and blah blah blah. What would those be? I'm like, oh, well, it would be this, and that. And then I looked at the scenario. Holy fuck, it fit that scenario perfectly. So it's kind of like a surgical, almost a surgical military precision attack. And so realizing that, it was easier for me to disconnect and not engage in the scenario that was enveloping. Can you speak to that too, maybe for the people now, not just the recognizing, but how to maybe transcend that situation? And is it a case of where you have to transcend it, or is it a case where this love bite is happening to you for a reason, and that you must go through it to learn something as well? What would you say to the audience on that level?
Well, that's a good question, Jean-Claude. And that's another paradox, right? Knowing what I know now, I would have now avoided and never got into my love bite. But as I said before, I realized now it was a necessary lesson I needed to go through. And who knows about my karmic setup, So we are again here in the dealing with this paradox. The mind cannot comprehend free will versus predestination, right? Fate and all of that, right? So it's like, it's very hard to navigate. But I think anything is a good experience if we learn a lesson from it. You know what I mean? We divide things in good or bad. But as you shared this, it reminded me of another thing which is very prevalent, and that got me into these love bite scenarios or very pathological relationships, is the victim-savior relationship. It's very common, which we mistake as love. And I was definitely the savior, right? Also taking care of the damsel in distress, and there's already, and then let me help you and take care of you and all of that. And there's already a power imbalance. So we can mistake that as love as well. And that's, the victim savior also unconsciously attract themselves each other, right? And for me personally, I was dealing with my own childhood wounding, dealing with the narcissistic mother, being narcissistically wounded and having developed codependency issues. I had to actually learn more healthy masculine principles, which had also been very, distorted nowadays with the, nice guy syndrome. I had the nice guy syndrome and all of the trying to impress, not always saying yes, doing everything for you. I had to learn to say no and making boundaries. Very key. Important with narcissists, because they will use shame and guilt against you. And I had to learn to say no without feeling guilty. And even I would recommend learning to say no without feeling the pressure to give an explanation. Just no, to be able to make that boundary clear, because that's how you also combat these entities, having strong boundaries.
Yeah. I mean, when you think, sorry, it's not about love bites, but just, I heard like a grown man tell me that he was pressured to get the jab and that he did it. And I'm like, I was taking a shower today. I'm like, where the fuck are your balls? You used to see your family? Oh, I'm going to take this. I don't know what the fuck is in this. To see my family? Like, that's like another extension of boundaries. Like, no, okay, I won't see my family. I'm not going to put myself at risk.
Now I have to say, and on that note, I'm same. My parents, they're in Germany, Munich, and I love you very much, but I will not visit you as long as I don't have to take it. Otherwise, I'm just going to happen. On that note, I mean, it's nothing. I mean, going out and seeing a masked man, nowadays, even like buff man with all these tattoos and they have a mask, there's nothing more pitiful and demasculated.
I say real men don't wear face diapers.
Exactly.
Very good. Okay, we're going to watch the wording here so we can keep this.
I'm sorry.
Because there's a lot of people absolutely mind blown by this conversation and they love it. We hope that it can stay on YouTube for as long as everybody who needs to hear it can hear this conversation. No, it's part of the game here. Yeah. I appreciate that. And Lyonesse Mama is saying, the timing of this is perfect. This conversation is hitting the notes for a lot of people in the audience. Including myself. I'm really enjoying this. And I want to thank you before we finish the show right now, Bernhard. This is absolutely amazing. Now let's get into, we have about half an hour left in this show. So what I'm going to do is ask the audience now, if they have questions for Bernhard or for MARYAM or myself, please put them in the chat now. Put them in high caps so it's easier for us to bring on the screen and to read. While I wait for those to populate, I wanted to ask you, Bernhard, let's start here. How do you define karma? Because here, again, too, in the spiritual community, people throw this word around, not necessarily understanding what it is and how it's affecting our lives in this particular incarnation. So what can you share to the audience here as a base I guess as a starter point for that conversation, and this could be another 2 hour show maybe later on the road, but in terms of learning all the lessons that we're trying to convey here tonight, karma is very important in the old context here.
No, that's a good question. I mean, that's, again, it could be definitely shown on its own, talking about karma. And it's interesting, recently, the past few years, I saw in the quote-unquote truther community, fringe community, this notion going around, there's no such thing as karma. Karma is past, it's a soul trap and all of this, and ties into the tunnel of light. It's a trap as well, and all this very doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article about it. I definitely disagree with all of that. This is kind of becoming, you can get very much in a too paranoid mindset that all Matrix, this life on Earth is a prison, and all of that. So karma in itself, has been distorted throughout the ages, has been used for social control. We see it with the caste system in India and whatnot. And it's a very superficial black and white view what people have. And, but it is a universal law. It is an absolute law. Yeah, that's the article, exactly. So it's a universal law. You see that in the Hermetic principles and whatnot. And it's basically the law of cause and effect, right? Meaning, everything has an effect. Everything has consequences. Every action, every thought, all of that. However, ultimately, there is no such thing as good or bad karma. These are things our ego makes up when we project human qualities into the mind of God, so to speak, that we think we're being rewarded or get punishment for something, right? So from a higher perspective, as I mentioned as well, from a soul perspective, there's only experience, period. Whatever the soul needs to experience in order to learn, And we also shape our destiny by our actions, by our thoughts, whatever we do. But karma is also not black and white. It doesn't mean like, for example, there's also a notion when I'm like going to kill somebody in the next lifetime, I'm going to get killed. Like this whole eye for an eye. It's actually way more complex, again, which the mind that cannot comprehend,
Yeah.
And I refer to Sri Aurobindo's Integral Yoga. He wrote a book, Karma and Rebirth. And it's not an easy read because it is a complex topic, but he talks about so many different things come in. And when you think even past lives, we cannot put our minds around it. There's thousands of different past lives, and even have issues with past life regression. People, the ego can easily hijack it and have this experience and that and whatnot, right? Or project stuff that even didn't happen. When there are multiples, thousands of it, and even the idea of past life is not correct because ultimately linear time, so everything is happening at the same time, which puts another layer of mindfuckery on this whole thing, right? And can even also transcend karma, right, in the sense and all of that. So there's also that, depending on your level of embodiment and all of that. But it's way more complex. What I'm bringing to, there's truth to the idea that whatever you do, there has a cause and effect, right? Very simple. For every action, there's a reaction. And not just your action, but also your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, your intentions, all of that has energy and there are consequences for all of that, for better or worse, right? But it's not that linear, right? It's not like for an evil deed, you got an evil deed for, you know what I mean? It's very mysterious. There's also divine grace, right? Because ultimately, God, the divine, has no judgment. And even mass murderers have experienced divine grace. Right. Actually, I think the song "Divine Grace," what's the song, was written by somebody who's experienced it in prison. Right. So you never know when the divine grace will happen to you as well. So it's beyond the human control. And karma as well. The issue with karma, as I said again, that we have projected our human judgment into that, right, of punishment and reward, good and bad. But it's beyond. But still, for everything you do, there are consequences. That's really what comes down to, the law of cause and effect. That's the best I can summarize it in a nutshell right now.
Okay, and we could probably do another 2-hour show on that. So thank you, I appreciate that. Ocean Odell is asking, Bernhard and MARYAM, what lesson took you the longest to learn? I'll start with you, Bernhard.
Well, that's a lesson I'm still learning.
Yeah.
So, for me, that's really also just more surrender, and aligning with divine will. That's why I'm at the higher will. And my meditations are always like, I want to, it's not what I want, it's what divine will wants. And I know how my own ego, I get myself into the way. so to speak, right? And
Right.
sometimes staying connected to essence, not being that reactive. I'm still working. I have my projections, my triggers, right? I can be ungrounded. So it's always bringing me back to essence and really living from essence, my true self, which is easier said than done. So that's really ongoing for me.
Okay. And Maryam, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree that, I'm working on my lessons, but I think for me, it's faith, just cultivating more faith and trust. And I'm still grappling with the whole, finding a partner that is worth me, that to communicate on a certain level that transcends violent communication, transcends blame, is not narcissistic, where it's like, you're wrong, I'm always wrong. So to just have a more healthy boundaries. I think life is short, and I personally have a wish to find someone. So that, and just being always like cultivating more mindfulness to be aware. I think it's all the balance. Let's say like we're talking about past lives and karma, and we were talking on our other show, Jean-Claude, that people put like everything's a past life connection. It's like you're in this life.
Right.
So ultimately, what are you learning in this life? And when you're pointing the finger, what are you doing to contribute to that dynamic?
Right, absolutely. Can I also answer that question, Ocean Odell? So my lesson would be the same thing. The longest one is to surrender to the higher self or to the flow of universe. I'm on that path. I'm doing it. I'm listening to the intuition. I'm acting upon it. I'm surrendering to not being attached to all of these outcomes. As Bernhard was saying earlier, this is a hard thing to do as well. From my perspective, anyways, this is a big challenge. And I have to add too, the biggest lesson that I have yet to learn is how to keep from having my YouTube channels being deleted. I just can't learn that one yet. So anyways, put that in for you guys. Somebody was asking, does Bernhard have a YouTube channel? Yes, I've been putting that up on the screen here quite a few times during the show. But if you're watching this on repeat as well, the links to Bernhard's sites are in the description box below. You'll find his YouTube channel and his website as well. Okay. Sorry for that little comical relief there, but it is what it is to be out here at this point in time. Okay, let me see if I can find another question here from the audience. Wow, I'm listening twice. Thank you. Yeah, everybody loves the show. I have to disagree with the guest on karma. Okay, Astro Sam, we all have different points of view. That's okay. Let me see. Anything else? While I look for other questions, is there anything else that's coming up to mind for you, Bernhard, in the context of this conversation tonight? Is there any other topics or maybe messages that you feel is important to convey to the audience here before we leave you?
No, I feel like in life what's happening, I was just talking what we discussed earlier, and I was talking to my wife Laura about this as well. What we're seeing in the understanding the different levels of being, right? Mm-hmm. Within humanity, understanding that everybody's here to awaken and without judgment, right? We're feeding the matrix, and if we look down on people, like as tempting as it is, right, to call people sheeple and stupid and all of that, it's not helping in the sense, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not taking myself out of the equation, but there are different levels. Most of the people are just deeply wounded and traumatized and conditioned, right? In that sense. So understand different levels of being without also overestimating our level of being. I've done this many times. So that ties into spiritual bypassing, when we overestimate our level of being and awareness. So healthy humility comes into that as well. Mm-hmm. Because what I realized in my life, the more I realize, the more I find out, the less I know, and the more I also embrace the mystery of life in the positive sense, right? There's some bigger plan along that ties into what Maryam also talked about, to have developed this deeper trust and faith, right, in the bigger picture, in the bigger power, right? Mm-hmm. And not let the negativity get to us, so to speak, right? And also understanding that you will never understand the matrix in life by any mental comprehension, intellectual sense whatsoever, right? The divine is an inner experience, and gnosis is an inner experience. So the more we can really connect to our inner self, that's the key in this day and age. But we also need, I feel, there's something to be said about spiritual activism. We need to actively resist the anti-divine forces, right? It's not about sitting at home and gazing on the navel, right? So I feel like there's a necessity for community, for action, right? On a conscious level to counteract, and also not giving in. I mean, the fact that you've been censored on YouTube shows me that you're doing something correct, right? So that makes me already want to listen more to you. It's like, okay, anybody who's been censored, canceled shows me, okay, this guy is, or this person's onto something. That's the way I see it, right? And
if you can find them, though, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
but
true.
it's like,
Yeah.
well,
so not only am I having trouble with YouTube, I'm just being booted off Patreon now too. Just so you know, apparently I'm inciting violence there with these beautiful conversations. So that is the nature of our reality. MARYAM, any last thoughts? And after that, I'll come back to you, Bernhard, and talk about. I want to share with the audience some of your beautiful courses, your articles, and your podcasts that are made available to them. So we'll be right back to that, Bernhard. But for you, MARYAM, any last thoughts here?
I did have a last thought, and it escaped me. Shit.
Do you want me to come back?
Yeah, can you come back? I really wanted to ask Bernhard.
Okay, very good. Connie says, excellente conversation. Merci beaucoup, Connie. That's great. Dina Creation. Salut, Jean-Claude. Je crois que cet épisode est la meilleure. She's saying it's the best episode ever. I agree. It's a very good episode. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate that. Okay, while we wait for MARYAM to collect her thoughts, Bernhard, let's talk about these courses here that are provided and the memberships. So how does this work? How do people connect with you, and maybe where do they start? They're listening to all of this. You've blown the mind of quite a few of the audience members here tonight, but where do they start if they want to take baby steps here and to get into this material in a very earnest and sincere manner?
Well, so there's a lot of content on my website. I have 40 articles, movies, videos. So if you scroll down on that homepage, they can sign up to my mailing list and then receive three of my ebooks for free. That's a good introduction to my work. If you just scroll down, then there's a write-up. There's podcasts and all of that, and then so I have that's also the membership, and you go a bit further down.
There you go.
Or you go. Yeah. Right here. So if you can just sign up here, you get on my mailing list as well. Okay. And then a free ebooks, which also these are also posted as blogs. These are long blog posts.
Yeah, this is long form.
Yeah, I have long form. So my work is not for a short attention span. Sorry, guys. Because some things cannot be summarized in a 10-point article. So my articles tend to be long. That's just the way there's a lot of references. And if you go the writings, there are more articles. Then there's the podcast with my Cosmic Magic podcast. With my wife and me discuss many different topics. I have guests on as well. Right. The latest one was, as I mentioned, with Paul Levy. Very fascinating. Right. And then go to courses. There are 2 webinars I offer. Just there's 2 webinars, Occult Forces of Fiber Dimensions and the Hero's Journey of Personal Embodiment, where I just lecture about these topics. But the main course is when you're on top, click on Time of Transition, Embodied Soul Awakening. That's really the foundational, in-depth, intensive course. We take just 25 people on a 10-week journey, really, and doing really in-depth work based on the fourfold approach, as a holistic self-work on all levels: physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual, in context of the outer work, the matrix control system, and the evolution of consciousness. And it's a 10-week program. It's very intense, and it's limited to 25 people, as it says there, and by application only. Okay. So we are taking new applications right now. Later this year, we are working on making this course also into a standalone, right? But for now, this is also where Laura and I will be active, and there will be live Zoom calls with that as well, where we do group calls and all of that. So that's a very intensive course, which we realize that's what people really need in this day and age, the foundation, right? Of really, we want to help people help themselves to become the spiritual warriors, to tune into their own guidance system and all of that. And I used to do one-on-one sessions for many years off here, but I stopped for now because, I realized people need to be sincere and really have a certain foundation. That's why we offer this course. And then me or my wife are also open for one-on-one sessions, but only for people who have gone through the course.
That makes sense at this point. You really hope that the people will do the groundwork first for themselves, and then you can have that really open dialogue where you're actually hitting the how do you say it in English? Hitting the rubber on the road or something like that. Like you're actually moving forward. Right,
I use exactly the same phrase.
Okay, you might have been screaming it in my ear, and I'm trying to translate that. Okay, very good. So, folks, you heard it here. Let's start at the bottom with the subscription. You get the free ebooks. There's quite a few podcasts and articles you can look at. And of course, here are these beautiful courses. This one is the starter course if you're really serious about getting into this interpersonal work. And at the very least, please go and subscribe here to Veil of Reality on YouTube. All of these videos, of course, are provided here for free, and there's a lot of material there. And this will give you a little bit more of an indication also to Bernhard's style, his depth of knowledge. And there's quite a bit of fascinating stuff, including this last interview here with Laura Eisenhower. She's been on our show before, absolutely fabulous. And to see both of your energies together, Bernhard, that it was absolutely beautiful. Okay.
Jean-Claude, one thing, I wanted to show, can you go back to my website?
Back to the website, yes?
Yeah, to the website link. And go and click on videos on top, on the video bar, on videos. Yep. Because I have 5 films which people would like to enjoy. And if you click on films on the right, on 4.
Yes,
no.
4. Yeah.
Yeah, just click on films. So these are 4 films, 5 films I've produced. Some of them, they can be they're fun to watch, very insightful. You know, especially I did Love Reality Time of Transition 10 years ago. UFOs, Aliens and the Question of Contact. I also did this 10 or 11 years ago, but it's very much prevalent in this day and age because we're reaching some sort of disclosure. There's tons of disinformation out there. So in the UFO field, so I highly recommend to watch that as well. Then the Matrix of Control Beyond its 3D manifestations, kind of basic overview of the hyperdimensional matrix. And then Know Whether Thyself is about esoteric self-work. And Loneliness on the Path is a good one too, because there's a lot of people experience that, right? But loneliness is also a lesson to come into solitude and strengthen our relationship to the divine. So that for people to check out.
Absolutely. Beautiful context. I love that. I'm going to go check out the UFOs and Aliens.
Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Okay. Because I was producing this Beyond Disclosure series here on YouTube. And of course, it got me in trouble here too, because we were speaking kind of against the narrative of disclosure. We were getting into all of that disinformation that Bernhard is just alluding to here. Okay. Maryam, let's go back to you. Do you remember what you wanted to do?
I remember.
Okay.
I remember. So Bernhard, I was working with someone actually that Jean-Claude introduced me to, Elisa. What's her name?
Elisa Herrera?
Yeah. So we were doing a past life, and I didn't know we were going to do a past life. So I was kind of in my mind saying, I don't want to do this and going along with it. And then when we came to this life, and sometimes I see words across my forehead, I saw the word hijack, and I just felt like under the Rona regime that they've kind of hijacked a part of life. Of course, it's what you do with it. But I was just curious to know what do you think? Do you think this Rona regime they've tried to suck up a little bit of humanity or kill the humanity or the spirit?
What the way it comes up to me is you say that I feel they're trying to hijack our soul. You know, that's what I've wrote in one of my ebooks, which I mentioned there before. I took the end game really from this hyperdimensional perspective, which again didn't start 2 years ago. It started thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And we had the end game, right? The alien invasion already has happened a long time ago, and it's through our minds and through our bodies from occult levels, hidden levels, right? And ultimately, the whole agenda behind 5G, chemtrails, the V, and all of that. GMM food and all of that is actually to poison our body, because our body is a holy temple, is our vehicle for ascension. Ascension has nothing to do with going out of, too many rich people are getting out of body. It's not about astral travel. It's about priming your body to embody the soul and use this, anchor the soul for the ascension process. And the end game is to hijack our soul, to disconnect it from the body, right? To remove more and more, so they prime our bodies as incarnational opportunities. The occult hostile forces, the hyperdimensional 4D STS forces want to use our bodies to inhabit, to work for. They use because we are creative beings. They are not creative. They use our creativity to manifest their reality.
Batteries.
That's what's happening. They're batteries, right? Yeah. So hijacking, they're trying to hijack our creativity, our soul potential. So we need to get it back. How do we get it back? Not just by externally resisting, but engaging in the alchemical great work, soul embodiment, soul integration to connect to who we truly are, and using our creative potential. That's what Paul Levy talked about, my guest. We need to, take back our creative potential and not just fight, not just point out what is wrong, but also create the new world we want to live in. That's key. And there's great things happening too, by the way, right? This whole thing, even with the censorship and all what we experience, it sucks, but it forces us to decentralize. It forces us to to organize ourselves.
Right.
You see it in the crypto world. I know there's a lot of talk about whatever Bitcoin and all these other different cryptocurrencies and who knows what, but there's also, the point is also decentralization, right? To organize ourselves to get out of the system. So there's a silver lining in all of that.
Yeah, disintermediation and self-empowerment, and no more looking and needing for that external validation or controller. That's the big point. Thank you for that. And you know what you were just talking about, Maryam, for the soul, was it Rudolf Steiner that said man will eventually inoculate himself from his own soul? I think this is maybe what's happening this year, so that something else can hijack that process, as Bernhard was just saying here. So that's absolutely on point. Somebody was asking, Sarah, what's the best methods to protect yourself from these entities? And Astro Sam says, Sarah, watch JC's channel more. I thought that was actually funny. That's very good. Thank you, Astro Sam. That's funny. But maybe let's touch on that as we finish the show here. Last tips and tools, maybe for the audience members who feel maybe they are under attack or control to some level here, and they're looking at maybe how to empower themselves here. What can you say?
So before you answer that, just to dovetail on that also, can you consider, do you think that light workers or messengers are also being attacked, and what can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, there's an esoteric law when you try to escape the matrix, or the general law, as it calls in Christian esotericism. The agent Smith will be put on you, will be trying to put you back into a place, right? So naturally you become more, and that's where you need a spiritual warrior, because I've seen so many people step up and want to awaken, speak truth, but then they go back to their comfort zone, right? So what we need, as Gurdjieff said, super efforts. And the efforts are not just externally, because I said, when you're in an awakening process, you need to take responsibility for everything, and that's the hardest thing to do, because the ego always likes to be in victim and blame and deal with all the stuff that comes up. And, when somebody asks how to protect myself from entities, I mean, that's a highly general question, because they can, appear in all kinds of ways. I have a whole 8-hour webinar that goes deeper into that, because it is a complex topic. So it's hard to generalize, right? But I know out of own experience, if we are sincere in our inner work, I bring it back, not to sound repetitive, but engage in the great work, the inner work, to come into soul embodiment, which means soul integration, then we automatically protect ourselves from interferences. Then we close the holes, right? There are many other protective mechanisms, which kind of like crutches, but help. It's just, I do my Qigong, just being grounded. Sometimes when you're under attack, just even taking a cold shower, or clearing yourself of salt, and all of that. These are techniques I use all the time, but ultimately it comes to the soul embodiment. Then, the more we come in alignment with essence, the divine, the more we raise our frequency, and then we became literally invisible to these entities, because we don't resonate on their frequency. Beautiful.
I think that's the mic drop moment for tonight. Smiling Eye says, bravo, Jean-Claude and Maryam, for adding Bernhard to the discussion. Yes, absolutely, indeed. Thank you so much for that, Smiling Eyes. Maryam, before we go, how can the audience support you here in your endeavors as you continue to fight the good fight and bring the truth here to our community?
Yes, please buzz on by to honeycolony.com. I cannot tell you, like yesterday I got a Google Analytics. You had 15.9K unique visitors. Yeah, mofos. I used to have 500,000 unique visitors. But then Google and Facebook and all of them are attacking people who stand to empower you to be your own best health advocate. So you can buzz on over. You can use BeyondMystic. And everything is made in the United States. If you want to support me, because my company can't support me right now, all expenses are going to my George Floyd documentary and book. Right now you can't even see screeners. I'm trying to get a interview from CNN, and you have to pay to see it because they've taken it off. They take stuff off so it doesn't exist, the Ministry of Truth. So you can, where should we tell people? You can go to BeyondMystic. You can use BeyondMystic on Honey Colony, or you can send something via Clifford at Honey Colony via PayPal, because I'm banned off of PayPal since 2017.
Right. So, folks, please do be generous and support MARYAM in our work here. I really appreciate it. And please do also check out Bernhard's work here at, let me break this back up, veilofreality.com is the website. And also go check out his YouTube channel here, again, at Veil of Reality here on YouTube. Go subscribe. Just subscribe here myself. And if you're watching this on replay again, I put the links in the live chat here tonight. But if you're watching on replay, please just click on the description box below, and you'll find all of the links to both Bernhard and MARYAM. And I want to thank each and every one of you for, I can see the numbers here. You guys have stuck with us throughout this 2-hour show. So absolutely amazing marathon. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you for supporting this show and these initiatives of bringing light to this beautiful planet of ours. And so that was episode 4 of the Quantum Woo with special guest here, Bernhard Günther, and of course, my co-host, MARYAM HENEIN. Thank you so much, Bernhard, for being here. And thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, MARYAM, and thank you, everyone, Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my third backup channel here. We are just now at 14,000, rebuilding the community once again, and how humbling of an experience that is, and I appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening, and au revoir.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Excellent.